We were just thinking about when we first met in our work. Can you remember it?
Yeah, yes, Lisa, I can remember it clearly. We first met on a Monday morning at the Blind Centre in Winton, and we were involved and about to do some recovery work to PMVA, which stands for you know what it stands for, but
But the people listening to this might not know.
yes. So, do you know what it is, Lisa?
You can tell me.
No, I'm asking you seriously. I've forgotten.
It's kind of like ways of managing physical aggression
Yeah,
and violence, and really it's about how do we work in ways of in recovery orientated way to de-escalate
yeah,
and not put hands on, I guess, and use
yeah.
communication.
So, just to put some context around that particular training and session, it's a it's a it's an induction into the Dawes Healthcare Trust, and it's a 5-day course, and at the end of it, you are basically then you do other training, but then it's part of your trust induction. We came in on the first morning of that training um, to talk about recovery to the group, and
Seems
that's
a
where we
long
first
time
met.
ago, doesn't it?
We're talking we're talking probably 8 9 years ago, maybe longer. And
Yeah.
as it stands as well, I've actually was privy and allowed within a year of that to do the actual 5-day training myself, to do a report and fly on the wall. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah, and
Like,
I think that was one of the first projects that we met in, and I think it's really interesting. We're now coming back to that piece of work, aren't we?
yeah,
And kind of not that we'd ever left it, but like really thinking about kind of cultural issues in regard to um, seclusion and segregation, but also gendered issues, and actually how do we kind of look at the lessons learned over the last 10 years? And I think it's an interesting time to be doing some of that and really thinking about that part of cultural change, I guess, as well.
yeah. I
Um,
think, yeah, definitely. I think the world has revolved around, we've come full circle in a way, and a lot of the issues then are really paramount and now, and it's clear to see. And I think it in some ways it's essential that we're there looking at this and come back to that, because there are so many things to be looked at, done, and sort of critiqued and changed to move forward. And I think PMVA, no falls first, sits restrictive practice sits at the fundamental area around social justice, inequality, all those elements which are restrictive in themselves need to be looked at and addressed. And I think that's where we are at the moment. And I think it's correct that we're looking at it and still talking about it and still making changes and attempt to change in it. I think it'll always be an ongoing thing. But yeah,
and I guess that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because if I think back about how we use lived experience and our definitions and understanding of recovery, I don't know about you, Rick, but my understanding and the way I use my lived experience has evolved and changed and developed, um, and the way we work with people coming into the organisation has changed a lot about how we use lived experience.
yeah,
Um, and I think sometimes that, we forget how much we've changed ourselves within our roles and our work, really. Because if
yeah,
I think back, I came in as a volunteer because I've been working with kind of learning and development in the trust and some community mental health teams. Um, and I'm just trying to think of some of the first projects that we worked on together. So it was the reducing restrictive practice, and then I guess it was some of the ward work and recovery education centre. I'm thinking around, Dorset was one of the pilot demonstration sites for recovery education. Can you
yeah,
remember some of the first courses that you did in the
yeah.
recovery education
I
centre?
Lisa, I remember my very first course, and it was delivered by myself and the illustrious Phil Morgan. It was at the Victoria Hospital site in Ferndown, which is now a block of flats and a car park. We had 13 people on the course. And that was my very first ever delivery, co-produced, co-delivered course. It was Introduction to Recovery, Phil Morgan in Ferndown. And relevant or not, Tonya, who was a student on the course. So I remember it. I remember it very, very well. And I know. And then I remember my second piece of work was I met Sam for the first time, and we done some training work at a centre in Parkstone, and we were thrashing out some of the finer details about, what we were going to do, the rec as such. And it's sort of our first, I suppose, one of our first get-togethers to thrash out how we were going to take things forward. So that was my second sort of piece of work. And then I think I'd done within that term maybe 3 or 4 courses. And then
it's
obviously,
funny, isn't it, to think our first term we had about 80 students, and now we've got around 6,000 registered students. And I guess my evolution of the work that we've done, I ended up being co-lead of the rec for about 5 years. And I've had the joy of sitting in car parks with spreadsheets, trying to work out how to get trainers here, there and everywhere. And I think we're really lucky now. There's a lot of infrastructure and systems around rec coordination. And kind of like Rick, we've done quite a lot of work together on and off, but I suppose our kind of most consistent piece of work together is around Access Mental Health and the retreats. Do you want to talk a bit around that and a bit about what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah. I think for me, I've been in post in my role now. It's actually 3 years. So crisis lead 3 years, and within that role, I am part of the retreat access mental health team. So I work into Retreat West and Retreat East, I suppose technically as the lead, we've shared with you, and then we work back to Access Mental Health being that access point. So you've got site liaison, home treatment, connections, community front rooms, and the retreats all working under one umbrella of Access Mental Health. So it's that point of call where we're pretty frontline, I suppose, when someone's in that time of need and in that time of distress or in their self-defined crisis, and those services hopefully are there to support that person and into those crisis points and through those crisis points. So
I think the reason why some of that came about was listening directly from some of our students that attended the Recovery Education Centre, sort of saying, what do you mean I've got a care plan? Or actually, when people might not see this as a crisis, but it is for me when this happens to me. And often I have to go through lots of hoops to get to a point of talking to somebody. And I often fall between the gaps. And I think having that ability to advocate and use narratives around people using services and lived experience, but also the learned experience of staff has been vital into the work that we're doing. And I guess that kind of goes in really helpfully into thinking current projects and future projects at the moment. I know that we're both involved in the mental health integrated services reviews in lots of different ways. What do you see the next step of our work and services?
It's a really good point, Lisa. I see some of the next steps. It's already, I suppose, starting, I see and if I talk specifically about the rec and then link that back to Access Mental Health, basically I see the rec going in some form into other services and delivering those rec-like courses across client bases, whether it be back in through CMHTs into maybe steps to wellbeing. So there's rec, because I always found that the rec gives people bigger, wider, more choice for learning and discovering and understanding around whatever they need to learn. I suppose the rec offers that, and I think if we can enter other domains with the principles of delivering and giving different courses, but in different genres and different areas, I think that's essential. Just as an example, and I know I'm probably jumping ahead, but I'm going to put it in here anyway. I've been working with a psychologist, Dr. Richard White. We've been delivering through Adult Psychology Service courses, 8-week courses back to caseloads on CMHTs for and about unusual experiences / psychosis. And we've been doing that now for nearly 3 years, but our numbers are very, very small. The people turning up, and it's a proper co-delivered, co-produced, co-written course, but the numbers predominantly have been quite small. Well, we've approached the rec, and we've now been told that we can develop that same piece of work, but through the rec, to give a wider offer. And so that's the next. So we basically come in now to the rec, and we'll be delivering this course not from the CMHT standpoint, but from the rec standpoint. And we feel that we're going to give it much bigger chance to be attended.
And I guess that feeds in really well with thinking about, the human rights agenda now and democratizing kind of education. So not pathologizing our experiences, but actually we want to learn about them. And yes, sometimes we do need labels, but also what we want to do a lot of the time is learn about ourselves and others. And I think that's really important. And I think the kind of like the evolution of the rec now, in terms of, like you say, that sitting across communities and us in reach into communities, but not doing to, but facilitating spaces with, is our kind of our identity, really. And I think we sometimes have to fight really hard to do that, because people want to put recovery in front of everything. And I guess part of my role, because I now work 2 days a week for the trust, utilising my lived experience and thinking about culture change, is actually thinking about that leadership levels now that we have around lived experience, and that, about that parity, that we all bring things, and supporting teams to think about their lived experience of their staff as well, whether you're in the NHS, in the community, or elsewhere. And I think what's really exciting is we're still being able to learn from our students in the rec and bring that learning in as we do in the retreats and as we do in our other work.
Very well said. What you just said, and I just harked back, still in, I suppose, because I still deliver on the rec, some of the experiences of actually the sharing, and you get to Bournemouth University, Bournemouth Bournemouth House, and you sit there, you're setting yourself up, you've met your co-trainer, you've got your PowerPoint, you've got your notes, you've got your your stuff to do, and then the students start turning up, and you come in, and you all, you know, you set the scene, and you try to make people feel as easy as possibly you can, and you sit down, and then you start the sessions. And for me, it's always, even now I'm beaming, because it's always brought me an excitement. I always look, every time I've done a rec course, I feel like I've grown, stretched, and learned something else. And you know, that bringing and sharing together, and people, I've seen people come in and quiet and easing their way in, and it might be their first ever rec course, but within a short space of time, or even at the end of it, you can see that they, because of how it is, that way of working and together, it frees people to be. And
I don't
I've
know
had so many.
about you, Rick, but I think sometimes it's quite hard to look at, especially when you've got lived experience, about looking back at your career and history and stuff. But I'm incredibly proud to be part of the Recovery Education Centre and part of its history. I don't know what you think.
Oh yeah, it's never to be forgotten, and it's really been massive in my life, huge. And without it, there would be, you know, I don't know what there would be, a chasm of nothing, I suppose. It's been essential in my own recovery, in my own growth, and you know, where I am today. I think the rec's been fundamental to a lot of that, and it always will be. And it's yeah, it's part of me. And it has, and it goes beyond even love it. I find it's just part of me, you know. And even to the point where you were the first trainer sessions, Lisa, and those, you know, and now it's, and as you said, from those small little acorns, we've just expanded and grown. And you know, the venues, North Dorset,
And
Bridport.
you know, that digital inclusion piece as well, you know.
Exactly. That was an interesting thing.
You know, and I think it's great that we've got hybrid ways of working now, so we can do a mixture of both, but also understand in reality that some people just aren't ready to come outside of their spaces, or the cost of living crisis as well. And I think it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years how we really kind of support people who are living in poverty, and the impacts on people's well-being around that.
Yeah, I think it's, well, that's a very good point as well. And I think with COVID, but also how, if we're going to talk specifically about the rec, how innovation and those initiatives were brought in around the podcast, around you guys doing all, writing all the changing the format from face to face to then putting that stuff into podcast and webinars, and then so that we could offer that through COVID, and how that was achieved. It's remarkable how even that was done, because it was done very, very quickly. When COVID hit, in a short space of time, we were still able to offer something to people. And I think that shouldn't be taken lightly, because it was hit the ground on having to think on your feet, but developing stuff, making sure it was all right, even to the extent where, you know, of having to put in the little checks and safeguards for people, and having the backing up HQ admin, making sure that there was people could have further support if they needed it. The host doing the work in the background, and all those little things people don't see or understand, but it all goes into the pot to make it work, and still give have an offer of giving something to people for them to use and have. I think those little elements need to be remembered.
So I'm going to use the old Ernest Hemingway trick. So in 3 words, what's the rec mean to you?
Part of life.
Mine would be hope, belonging, and connection. Thanks, Rick. That's been really interesting. And you and I, as always, could get into quite a lot of philosophical debates because we haven't even got on to like race or gender or all the other things that we have a bit of an interest in. Um, and I think it's, thinking about sustainability, what I hope by doing these sorts of bits and pieces that the next generation of peers and people that use their lived experience will also kind of connect to us, in 10 years' time, listening to this, thinking about these are kind of the steps towards kind of just people treating people as people. And we have labels, and we're physical health, mental health issues, trauma issues, discrimination in society, but actually fundamentally we are people, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it is true. That is true. We are just people trying to do the best we can. And yeah, so for me, it's
and I will end with that made me remember, like, so our old quote would be, "It will be fine." And then I think that the new iteration of that is, "It will probably be fine." And that's got us through quite a few things in our time, in our relationship, and between the Recovery Education Centre and other pieces of work, because we know if we co-produce and co-deliver, that we have someone holding our back, I guess.
Yeah, and again, and that's for me, I'm going to end with, and you just said it in a way which is probably more eloquent, but that coming together, co-production, working without those sort of like containments of structures, but just trying all just to work together, done in a co-produced way, with human being at the centre of all that when moving forward.